MailChimp understands that you're more than a small business. That's why they've developed more intelligent marketing tools than ever before to help you grow your brand, your following, and even your confidence. MailChimp, built for growing businesses.
One of the exercises I love to do is, can I or can somebody on our team and the group tell me about the book in 2 simple sentences? Just try to capture it. Just try to describe in your words what that book is in 2 simple sentences. And if you can do that, then you're kind of onto solving what the jacket could or needs to be.
Welcome back to Working. I'm your host, Isaac Butler.
And I'm your other host, Rumaan Alam.
Rumaan, who was that we heard at the top of the episode?
Isaac, this week I spoke to Rodrigo Corral. Rodrigo is a graphic designer, and actually we get into precisely what he does in this conversation, but I will say that I knew his name and I knew his work from his many book jacket designs.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm very excited for our listeners on this one because even though I have been through the cover design process myself twice, a lot of that process was still mysterious to me. So I have to imagine for people who aren't writers, it is exponentially more mysterious.
100%. You know, as you say, I've been through this 3 times myself. Actually, more than that, because I recently had the chance to weigh in on the jacket of Gene Stafford's Boston Adventure, which was reissued in paperback by New York Review Books. I wrote the intro, and so the editor very kindly shared the designs with me. And in doing so, it just reminded me that this is such a mysterious process, but maybe images always feel a little mysterious to people like us who work primarily with words.
Yeah, definitely. One thing you discuss quite a bit in this conversation is the publishing house FSG. For our listeners who don't know FSG, what is it? What do they need to know about it?
Sure. Farrar, Straus & Giroux, with whom Rodrigo has a long-standing relationship, is one of the great American literary publishers. Just to mention 2 novelists who I think listeners might know, FSG publishes Jonathan Franzen and Raven Leilani. So I think it's a publishing house that is really considered on the forefront of American letters. I think that, as Rodrigo and I discuss in our conversation, it's hard to distill it down to like a single look or single image, but it's a very significant part of the American publishing system.
And so are our Slate Plus members getting a little something extra this week or what?
Yes, as always. I talked a little more with Rodrigo about his creative process, specifically about the relationship between the work that he does and his family life, because this guy has 4 kids, which is next level, in my opinion. We also got the chance to talk about, the book designs that are in stores right now that he responds to. I just really wanted to know from his sort of professional perspective, what's a book jacket that you could walk into a store right now and see that he really admires?
I don't want to miss that, and I'm sure our listeners don't want to miss that. And hey, listeners, if you subscribe to Slate Plus, you won't have to miss that. You'll get exclusive members-only content, 0 ads on any Slate podcast, full access to articles on Slate.com without hitting a paywall, bonus episodes of shows like 1 Year and Big Mood, Little Mood, and you'll be supporting the work we're doing right here on Working. It's only $1 for the first month. To sign up, go to slate.com/working+. All right, now let's listen in on Rumaan's conversation with Rodrigo Corral.
Working is brought to you by Progressive. Are you thinking more about how to tighten up your budget these days? Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed in 2020. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. I want to begin by asking, if I was seated next to you at a party, dinner party seems so abstract now, but dinner party conversation is always predicated on so what do you do for a living? I wonder how you would answer that question.
I'd probably pause and overthink the question. Because on one hand, I'm a graphic designer. On another hand, I'm a creative director, art director.
I'm glad that you brought up all the sort of multiplicity of terms that describe the same basic endeavor, because that's kind of what I was getting at. I used to work in advertising, so I have like experience like being paired up with art directors or answering to a creative director. They're sort of all fundamentally graphic designers at heart, but I wonder if you could sort of like tease out what the distinctions are in your own mind. In what way are you now a creative director as opposed to a graphic designer?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you're a creative director, you're generally leading a group of people within a company or corporation. So you're sort of thinking about the individual projects and then how those individual projects affect the overarching look and feel of the company.
Graphic design, or design even more broadly, sounds like a sort of niche endeavor. But then when you start to think about your experience of life, everything that you touch is designed. A light switch is designed, a fork is designed, a yogurt container is designed, a television advertisement is designed. Everything that we look at, everything that we encounter is sort of, there's one person or a team of people who are the authors of that experience, and we don't always get to know or talk to those people. But I had an agenda in wanting to talk to you today because I'm a book person, I'm a writer of books, I'm a reader of books, and I've really wanted for a long time to talk to someone for this show who designs book jackets. So just to establish for our listeners some of your work, because I think that a lot of people are going to know your work, I'm going to mention the cover of James Frey's A Million Little Pieces, which shows a hand covered in sprinkles against a pale blue backdrop. Or I'll mention John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, which has a black cloud sitting atop of a white cloud with this lettering that kind of looks like chalk on a blackboard. Or I'll mention Junot Diaz's The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which has a kind of spray-painted silhouette that sort of looks like graffiti, but it also sort of looks like a Rorschach test. If you go to the bookstore right now in this country, you're going to see paperback editions of Rachel Cusk's Outline, Transit, and Kudos, which each have these arresting photographs on the cover. A seashell perched in the sand, a praying mantis trapped in a plastic cup, a view from an airplane window. I'm only mentioning a few of your designs, but I think this gives a sense of what it is that you've done that really caught my attention, which is book design. So what are the marching orders? What does the brief look like when you're designing a book jacket? And how is that different than when the task is to design a hotel logo or an illustration for a magazine article?
There are some overlapping qualities there between a logo and a book jacket. There is a creative brief. In publishing, we kind of refer to it as either a tip sheet or a cover memo. And in there, it has the key elements. You have a title, author. Is it a hardcover, paperback, comparison title, comp titles as they call them, and a brief description of the book? Because that should kind of give you a baseline to sort of know what you can do. What we try to do is really dive into the text, and I think almost naively, like reading a manuscript, thinking, well, why did the author pick this? It's almost like a series of whys upon whys upon whys. And so all the covers you mentioned, as you're listing them, I'm thinking you could line up 10 people in a room and show them those covers, and for most of them, they might not even register any of the elements. They might not even see the silhouette on Oscar Wilde, or they might not make any heads or tails of what the bubbles on the clouds on Fault in the Stars mean. But personally, those ideas come from the content. Responding to the content of the book and it staying with me and feeling like it has power, it has lasting value. And for me, the biggest hope is, as readers, I think readers want to go on a journey. And they want to feel like in some ways they're discovering something, they're learning something, they're gaining something. So I think a jacket just gets to add to that story.
But the jacket also has to do this other thing, which is to sort of persuade the reader to take the journey in the first place, because the jacket is sitting on a table at a local bookstore or it's sitting on the shelves at the library and it has to communicate something. And presumably the marching orders, the brief that you're getting from a publisher, because every publisher wants their books to sell 1 million copies, is give us the most arresting possible thing, like really capture the reader's attention. Is that always sort of the foremost in your mind, standing out on a crowded table? Or is that something that you leave that to the marketing people to worry about that?
I think about it as far as this, like understanding that our lives are so much around a laptop, a cell phone, and we're seeing things, for the most part today more than ever, we're seeing it digitally first. And so I try to take that into account. But beyond that, I'm really trying to get to the most effective and impactful solution that is true to the content of the book. And that can sound pretty naive, or I don't know, too earnest is the word, but it just it's really what I try to stay focused on. If I'm aware of what's out in the marketplace, but I'm not trying to get too wrapped up in that.
Well, I actually think it sounds very sincere, and I wonder whether you have a similar approach if you're designing the art for an album or the logo for a restaurant. Do you have to listen to that album? Do you have to understand the kinds of food or the kind of experience the restaurant is aiming to deliver? Or can you simply sit down and dash something off? If I told you I'm opening a restaurant called Fireside and we're going to serve like comfort food, is that enough information for you? Or do you as the designer need something more to have a different kind of relationship to the thing that you're making?
I think, yeah, we need to have another relationship. It other feels like it's almost like there has to be some level of emotional investment into it. I know that sounds strange. I have clear memories hearing you ask that question of early on professionally having art directors pull me aside and say, you need to lighten up about this stuff. Like, why, like this is work. It's not life. And I'm sure I had like a horrified look on my face because I was so devastated something was rejected. So yeah, I think there has to be more layers to it.
I mean, what's so interesting to me about this is that you are an artist, you're thinking visually, but you're negotiating when you're designing a book with a sensibility that doesn't necessarily think that way. You're dealing with an artist who works in words and not in images. And so you're almost translating something, right? Do you have to like the book that you're designing the jacket for? Do you have to have, like you said, you need an emotional connection to the material? I suppose dislike is also an emotion, but like, do you need to feel like, oh yeah, this book, Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen, you designed the jacket of that book is coming out this fall. What if you had hated that book? What if you had thought, I don't get it. I don't understand what this novel is attempting to do. I don't know how to create a face for it. Has that ever come up in your work?
I'm sure it has, but I can't help but, I can't believe I'm still, after the many years I've been working, that I still think back to days of school, but still have the voices of my professors saying, like, you have to keep yourself open and as curious as possible if you want to have a career as a conceptual graphic designer, as a graphic designer, period. If you want longevity, you have to stay as open as you possibly can. And so I try to remove whether I like or dislike. It's more, am I understanding what the author is trying to achieve, what the writer is trying to communicate?
I wonder if you could explain your relationship to the publishing house, FSG, for whom you've done a lot of really well-known covers over the past few years.
FSG was my first professional job out of college. And the environment was very editorially driven. And so it was quite an exciting place to be out of school where, the content was really, really, really king. And it was less so about the marketing. Not to say marketing didn't play a critical role, but it really felt it was about the authors. and about making sure the authors were being represented in the best way possible. And so, and it felt in many ways very inclusive. Very early on, I had the opportunity to present as a young designer, where in certain situations you're going to be sort of kept out of that process. And so it kind of set the tone for me professionally. And so after working at FSG for Farrar, Straus & Giroux for 5 years, I just bounced around a little bit, and it was kind of difficult to find that, sort of replicate that environment. And about 10, 11 years later, Jonathan Galassi reached out and was looking to fill a creative director role. So it seemed pretty clear to me that if I was ever going to come back to work in-house full-time at any point, it would be Farrar Straus.
When you speak of Farrar, Straus & Giroux as a particular kind of literary publisher, where the author's work takes precedence, where the idea that this is a work by this author, whether it's a first-time writer like Anna Wiener or a sort of like great man of letters like Jonathan Franzen, like this is the author's work. And it's sort of maybe a useful way of thinking of the opposite of this is those old, inexpensive Penguin paperbacks, where they all had kind of a uniform graphic look that was about the way Penguin wanted you to think about the books. And you could buy Shakespeare or Chaucer or anything from the Western canon that was all sort of designed inexpensively and sort of charmingly. But there's no particular aesthetic look, I don't think, that defines what a Farrar, Straus & Giroux book looks like. Do you think that's true?
I would agree, yeah. And I think we at FSG would take that as a compliment, that we're in the business of publishing stories and authors' stories. So yeah, we want each one of those books to feel like they stand strong on their own individually. And so we really try to avoid falling into any patterns if we can, into any styles if we can avoid that. And so it's something that I know the art department and the publishing house at large prides itself on that.
So then I wonder if you can think about your own work, sort of divorced from your corporate relationship with FSG, because you've also done book jackets for a host of other publishers. I tried to sort of look through your Instagram, look through your portfolio, and try and find the common thread. Try and find like the single sort of, this is the connective tissue. This is what makes this a cover by Rodrigo Corral versus by, whoever else. And I'm not sure I could find one. I saw resonances. I saw that for Jeff Vandermeer and Hanya Yanagihara, you had made these covers that had this very lush, almost mysterious illustration. For the Icelandic writer whose name I can never pronounce, is it Sion? Sion, who's a writer from Iceland, or for Jeffrey Eugenides, you had made these jackets that were really about the lettering, about the type, And then you designed a book that I love, By Blood, which is a novel by Ellen Ullman, that has a very simple graphic treatment, these sort of like concentric circles. You also have designed these books by Vince Pissarro and Jonathan Franzen, both of which use archival photography. So I can find these little resonances, but I can't find the connective thread that is your aesthetic. Do you think that you can define what that aesthetic is to me, or do you think that it doesn't exist?
I hope it doesn't exist. If we had to land on one, it would be a degree of simplicity, keeping it spare. I mean, one of the exercises I love to do is, can somebody on our team and the group at FSG or at the studio tell me about the book in 2 simple sentences. Just try to capture it. Just try to describe in your words what that book is in 2 simple sentences. And if you can do that, then you're kind of onto solving what the jacket could or needs to be. That's pretty much part of the process regularly with design for us and for me.
We'll be back with more of Ruman's conversation with Rodrigo Corral after this.
The makers of paper and paper packaging are continually working on ways to make recycling easier, on designs and processes that create less waste, and on renewing our forests to ensure an abundance of natural resources for generations to come. Every time you choose to recycle paper and paper packaging, you're playing an important role in this circle of caring. Your choices make less waste, because products made from tree fibers, like cereal boxes, milk cartons, and magazines, can be recycled up to 7 times. Your choices inspire the industry to continue to innovate in the mills where paper and paper packaging is made, where new processes can return water even cleaner than it started, and new technology can turn more types of recovered waste back into recyclable materials. Your choices help plant more trees, because the families who watch over our forests are growing and planting and helping to protect wildlife and their habitats. Learn more about how your choices help power this circle of caring at paperfornature.com. Choose paper and paper packaging and be a force for nature.
Hey listeners, one of the things we'd love to do with this show is help you solve your creative problems. Whether it's a question about negotiating, research challenges, collaboration, really anything at all, send them to us at working@slate.com or give us a ring at 304-933-WORK. And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Working wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's get back to Ruman's conversation with Rodrigo Corral.
Every art director I ever worked with, I would go into their cubicle or into their office, and there would be sort of this ever-shifting wall of scraps, accumulated scraps, pages torn from magazines, jackets torn from the covers of books. Like, I worked, when I worked in advertising, a lot of our clients were fashion-based, and so sometimes I would go see these art directors and they would have like a sweater or a scarf or fabric pinned up on the wall. I wonder how it is, if you were interested as an artist, as a designer, in constantly refreshing the library of reference or the tools with which you're working, I wonder what you're looking at and what you're collecting, and maybe what you're looking at right now that maybe guides work that you haven't even yet been assigned to do.
Honestly, it's just kind of living, being alive and being happy that I'm alive and looking out my window, and it's kind of looking at everything in life with how and why. Like why that color, why that medium. So it's almost like looking at everything with a why. So I'm trying to be always open, but I'm not necessarily saying, okay, I'm going to go spend some time on the Criterion collection today and be inspired. I just kind of, I went to a hardware store the other day. That to me is really inspiring. I love walking around hardware stores. It's like a place where it feels like another version of an art supply store. And you can just kind of find yourself seeing degrees of texture and materials that I might start thinking about bringing into my work.
I just saw on your studio's Instagram feed an image of a proposed but ultimately rejected cover for Lauren Groff's book, Florida, which is a collection of short stories. And it is such a good cover. It's such a great image that for whatever reason, the publisher didn't use. So I am curious to know, like, whether you have a sort of standard number of directions you take on a given project. And I'm also really curious to know who ultimately decides, whether you're in that room arguing for the merits of one approach over another, or whether you simply leave it in the hands of the editor and the publisher.
Well, so it depends. So if we're talking about for our Strauss and Giroux side, we'll connect directly with the publisher and marketing and sometimes the authors. But if it's a project for another house, it really is. It's as simple as we're submitting layouts, and it's in the hands of, I'm assuming, publisher, author, agent, marketing. But this idea of talking to authors is something that I feel like is obviously puts me in a very different position creatively if I'm connecting directly with a writer.
I wonder if people would be surprised to hear how little the author actually has to do with the jacket that becomes the face of their book. I know so many writers who don't know who made their books, or sort of know their name as like the email address from which they were forwarded the final version of the cover. It's a funny thing, though, because it's a pretty intimate relationship, because you're the one, like I said, who sort of creates the face of the book. What are those conversations like when you get to have them with writers?
I look forward to them because it's an opportunity to get to hear the person behind this work that they've spent probably years working on, and years before that just thinking about the project. So I try to come with some questions, and usually, it just takes a few questions and you just find yourself, just really diving into process and getting them to talk about what they hope for, and give us sort of an inroads to understanding an author's thoughts on design, and do they have a strong point of view on design or not.
I want to talk about a specific book because I think it'll be useful to have kind of like a case study. And I chose a book that I thought had such an arresting cover, and the longer I looked at it, the more puzzled I was by the cover, actually. It's a book called Everything Now. It's a work of nonfiction by the writer Rosecrans Baldwin. It is a work about the city of Los Angeles. I'm going to take a stab at describing this cover. It's sort of an acidic, that sounds harsher than it sounds, an acidic sort of appley green. And there are 4 black and white images that feel archival, but maybe they just feel that way because they're black and white. They're irregularly placed across the surface of the book. And then there's that sort of heavy black type with the word now, the second part of the title, rendered in all caps. So again, like the longer I looked at this book, the more I was like, I have a question about every decision on this book. And I really wonder how it is a jacket comes to be. How did that come to be? How did that design coalesce?
So I've loved Rosecrans, all of his books leading up to this one so much. And then combined with his tackling of Los Angeles. I'm, like most creatives, interested in trying to visually harness any story around Los Angeles. My not having lived there feels like I'm at a disadvantage. So it felt like I should try to find someone that lives there, has a strong point of view. And so I went to the photographer Mike Slack, who's been a longtime resident of Southern California and is a photographer, and also happened to be a sales rep for us at Macmillan, which is the parent company of FSG. And so it achieved 2 things. One is getting to work with a talented photographer, a friend, and someone who has in my opinion, a real intimate relationship with Los Angeles. And so I felt like this would be a perfect marriage. And so those are sort of the fun opportunities in design where you can really, there's the one thing that surface, the part that you and nobody else would know if don't have the background information on the book jacket. But as a creator, it really is sort of an exciting and makes it sort of very perfect, clear image.
And I guess maybe that's part of the distinction between being a creative director and when you're working as an illustrator for hire, that you're directing or harnessing other people's talent or ability to create a single vision that is maybe your own, that sort of incorporates their work. So with that in mind, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your studio functions, because I'm curious to know how many designers are there working on these projects, and how you ensure as a creative director that the work that you're producing reflects your own sensibility, even if we've already established that there's no single sensibility or that you can't be reduced to that. Is it that you're working with people who think like you, or is it that you're working with people who don't think like you? Is it about being really involved in every decision, or is it about just sort of like letting designers find their way forward and then talking to them once you have something to discuss, like once you have a real template in front of you? Like, what's the approach?
The approach really is, it's honestly, it's all of the above. It's like I like to be as involved in the project as much as possible, but it's also really critical to give designers the space to create, right? So it goes back to that exercise of the simple sentences, or, since much of our work is in books, a lot of it is, let's read the manuscript, let's have a conversation around the manuscript. What jumped out to you? What jumped out to me? Taking notes. I think one of the most valuable parts of the process is time. I always use this example of getting a tattoo. I don't have any tattoos, so I could be completely full of it with this example. But if I were to get a tattoo, I probably would have it drawn out, and I would pin it on my wall, and it would sit there for weeks, if not maybe months. And the idea is, well, depending all the series of moods I'm in, sometimes I'm in a good mood, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm really happy. And all those feelings in between, it's important that I can come back to that visual, whatever it is, and feel like I can connect with it. Does it have multiple layers to it? Is there potential to attach meaning to it? These things that designers think about, obsess about, that maybe the average consumer doesn't give one bit about, doesn't care at all. But that has been, for us, our biggest friend, is really being able to have time. So we'll start projects, we'll push fast, and then we'll pause. We'll sometimes let a week, 2 weeks go by, and then come back. And in that time, I'm always describing it as sort of like, it's like passive working. It's always in the back of my mind. It's there. And so when we leave it out as a printout, or if it's pinned up, it's, well, how do I feel about that weeks later? How do the designers feel about it? Is it still working for them? Does it still have the same resonance as it did when they came up with the idea? So really, time is one of the biggest tools in our process, is just being able to have time to reflect on what the best solution could possibly be. And, we're in the business of problem solving is what we're doing. So it's really looking at what's wrong with this, while what's right with it at the same time. Or have we seen it before? All these questions you're asking yourself.
So you talked about having to have an emotional connection to the material at hand. And so I wonder if there are books that you love, just books that you love as a reader, that you would love an opportunity to design a jacket for.
Oh, there's always been one. Because my family is from Colombia, I'd want to design all of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's backlist. I'd basically want to take a year, read all of the books, take all my notes, repackage the full set, and deliver it to the publisher with a bow on it.
Oh, that's a great answer. Well, Rodrigo, it was such a great pleasure to talk to you and hear a little bit about how you make books and other things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
MailChimp is in the business of growing businesses, so no matter what stage you're in, MailChimp's smart marketing platform can help you grow and get your brand out there. You're more than a small business, and MailChimp's got more intelligent marketing tools to help you grow it, with marketing automations, design tools, and recommendations that all work together to help you sell more stuff. MailChimp, built for growing businesses.
My work has been seen by millions. My work helps save lives. My work has gone platinum because I help deliver the Vince Lombardi Trophy, life-saving medical devices, and equipment that records the biggest hits. I work at FedEx.
Apply now at fedex.com/careers. FedEx, where now meets next.
Rumaan, that was so great. I learned so much about this world that I've been in, but there's a whole other side of it that I know nothing about. And one thing that I found really fascinating is how little he thought about what I would assume would be the first thing, top of mind, which is, how do I get someone interested enough in this book to part with money to get a copy of it, which you think that's what the book jacket's job is, but he really does not want to care about that, it seems.
Yeah, and at the same time, we heard Rodrigo speak, and not dismissively, about the sales team as someone to whom he is accountable as a designer. So I think it's on his mind, but not top of mind with respect to what he's doing artistically. And maybe you could argue that if the cover's thoughtfully executed, then the reader will respond. In the same way that I think your editor would tell you, Isaac, look, if your book is good, the readers will come. So don't worry about how to sell it, worry about making it good. It's true that this jacket is supposed to sell the book, but, I don't think anyone really knows what shoppers want. Corporations spend a fortune trying to answer that question, and they can never really agree, or they have the research. You think a lot about film, Isaac, so you know this, that a movie studio will be like, oh, this movie tested through the roof, and then it turns out to be awful, and nobody wants to see it. Or the inverse will be true. So maybe it's just a fool's errand to chase, commercial success above making a nice thing in and of itself.
Yeah. And I think you see that really reflected in his designs as well, because they are very particular and specific. I mean, we all know of the publishing houses where everything's like a watercolor faces overlapped on one another. Or, there's a yellow and a blue and a this and a this because it looks good on Instagram, and all their covers wind up looking the same. That is not what his covers are like at all.
I mean, it's true that in our conversation, Rodrigo and I did not talk too much about the fact that books as a medium are really prone to these kinds of design cliches. As you just said, like certain kinds of watercolors, certain kinds of graphic treatments that look really arresting on Instagram. There are a million kinds of tropes behind book design. Figures facing away from the reader's perspective, or like a certain kind of historical looking photograph for a certain kind of historical looking novel. There are all of these design cliches, and I do think that Rodrigo's work really avoids pretty much all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to make sure we talk about, because I was really struck by it, is his insistence on time being a great creative tool. You and I are so used to being under the gun with deadlines, but sometimes you want to just make something, set it aside for a while, ruminate on it, give yourself the space to consider and reconsider and reconsider. And, I just thought that was a good reminder, because I do feel like lots of creative people, we find ourselves in this hurry up and get it done as quickly as possible. And sometimes actually, what you really need, yes, deadlines are helpful for creative work, but sometimes what you really need is enough space to really think about what you're doing and enough time to really consider it.
I think for me, that was the major takeaway from this conversation. I've noticed this with respect to my own work, that sometimes I take that time without really realizing it. So I think the last piece of fiction that I published was in Esquire magazine last year, but that's a story that I had been sitting on for, I think, 2 years. And it wasn't that I was consciously doing that. I think I just wrote it and then sort of forgot that I had written it. And then before I sent it into the magazine, I looked at it with these fresh eyes, and I saw it in a way that I couldn't have seen it 2 years ago when I had first written it. And I revised it accordingly. I think that distance of time really helped me to see the work more clearly.
So I thought it would be fun for our listeners, because you and I have both been through the book cover design process from our end, to talk a little bit about our latest books and their covers and how they came to be. So can you tell us a little bit about Leave the World Behind and how the cover came to be what it was?
Yes, this is something that I have not had the opportunity to talk about a ton, but I love this particular story. So, on my last book, Leave the World Behind, I had turned in a draft of the book, and my editor, the editor to whom I turned it in, announced a couple weeks after I gave it to her that she was leaving her job. And this is a real blow. This is like I was very deeply connected to her, and I really trusted her, and I just worried that the book was going to become orphaned, which can happen sometimes inside of big publishing houses. And one of the last conversations I had with her while she was still working in her capacity as editor was, she said to me, "I just want you to know that I have made a cover for your book. I have worked with the art director to make a cover for your book, and it is my parting gift to you." And she sent me the design, which is in fact the design that we used. It is a painting by an artist named Jessica Brilli. Sarah Wood, who was an in-house designer at Echo and is now a freelance designer, had designed the jacket. It was her idea. And I saw it and I just thought, this is absolutely perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's a painting of a swimming pool at night. There's a diving board. It just somehow looks really, I think it reminds people of Hockney. It reminds me of Hockney, but the darkness gives it a kind of sinister or kind of mysterious quality. Something about the image really seems to distill the feeling of the book, which I think is